Hi all. Definitely didn't forget to start the recording. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really exciting for us because this is the first time we have the four heads of the river. So we are actually looking at multiple false heads. It's going to change the way we do things very slightly because we're going to be talking to some extent at times a little bit more generally, and we're going to be directing you guys to be going to have a look at some of the rules and regulations of the specific races that you're competing in. But fundamentally, we are obviously talking about the same piece of water. And we are obviously also talking to steers people as well as coxswains, and we will try and encompass all of that as well. Also, thank you so much to everybody who also submitted some questions. Hopefully, we will cover pretty much all of that as we go, but we will make sure as well that there is a chance to ask some questions of us at the end, or just drop them in the chat as we go. We can see your chat, and so we'll be able to kind of answer questions and we can interrupt each other. But just to say hello, my name is Erin. I am one of the mentors at WOX, and joining me is Tilda.
Hello, I am also one of the mentors.
Yeah,
That's about
and
it.
yeah, that's about it. Well, Tilda's
I'll
also
come in the
coaching at
second half.
Cambridge. She's assistant coach for the women at Cambridge. Um, and so she knows the tideway like the back of her hand. And you've got the dream team because I've spent majority of my career in a bow loader four. So hopefully I can give those of you who are coxing a bow loader a little bit of information and tips and tricks as we go along, because if you've spent a lot of time in eights and jumping into a bow loader, that can also be a little bit scary, especially when you're navigating the tideway as well. So the very first thing we're going to do, and I'm hopefully the marshals are going to be absolutely delighted that we're telling you this, is read the rules. We are going to be kind of talking about lots of different things, and there are different things that you need to kind of think about when it comes to basically the rules of the race that you're participating in. Even if this is your 10th time doing that particular race, the rules are adapted and changed all the time. Fundamentally, all the rules are there for your safety. They are all there to ensure that the race runs smoothly, that everyone gets the best opportunity to give out their best performance. And so some of the rules might not make much sense to you, but it may well be that, an incident has happened in the past and that rule has then been created to try and mitigate that in the future. But what I would say is have a read of the rules, take your time going through it, even if you think you know everything, because it may well come to a point that you really need them at some point. As there are multiple different races going on, there will be different sort of briefings and slight nuances to the rules in different races. And we're going to be kind of running through some of the different sections, especially around kind of safety and marshalling, which is often when, things are quite challenging, especially if you are in that bow loader and there's a lot of boat that you can't see. But make sure essentially you get a good idea of what the rules are for the race you're participating in. And then if you have any questions as well, it's really easy to either drop us a message, and if we can help, we will navigate you to the right point. But also you can also get in touch through social media or through some of the emails with the race committee as well if you really need some clarification. But the biggest and the most important thing is read the rules. As a steers person or as a cox, you are in charge of safety, and that is your first and kind of most important rule. So we're going to think about before we even get to race day. It's great that you guys are here. We are, just over 2 weeks out. And some of the big things that I think can be done and make you guys feel as well prepared as possible is actually starting now to think about how can you be best prepared for the racing itself. There are a few different things that you can do. One of the things that I really like to do is have a day plan. Obviously, we are dealing with the tideway, which means for those of you, I hope this is not a shock to anyone, but it is tidal. And therefore, the race times will always be slightly different year on year as to essentially what the timing for the day actually looks like. As a result, for some of the different events at different times, you may well be able to get in a pre-paddle, but some of you may not be able to get in pre-paddle. It depends on the start of the race, but it also depends on obviously how long you're coming, traveling for and whether that's actually a possibility. So if you're not doing a pre-paddle, what does that look like? How are you going to make sure your athletes are as warmed up and ready, especially if they've maybe been sat in the car for a while? That might be encouraging them, to get to stretching and telling them that that's something that they need to be doing, or kind of exploring that if you are doing a pre-paddle, what do you want that to look like? Have a chat to your coach. because they won't be able to come out most likely on a launch with you, especially if you're boating from a host club. So you're going to be needing to run the pre-paddle yourself. Also, being aware, as well, as we've said, it is tidal, that most likely your pre-paddle is going to be in the opposite conditions to that you're racing. So you will be basically doing the inshore zone, and you may want to do bursts in the race direction, but the race direction might not be with the right flood tide or ebb tide or whatever it is. So just make sure you're hot on that. Have a think as well about boating time. We're going to talk about that a little bit more shortly, but that's something that you need to be thinking about in terms of when you're boating and how long do you need to take to get to the start line. Also, knowing what time you need to be in place by, and you can start to essentially build that pre-race package and how you warm up. Another thing I like to do is have a look at who's around me. That will actually really help me understand as I'm building the race plan what I might be wanting to do. So if you have a crew that you know is potentially going to be bombing off in front of you, then that's a little bit easy. You know that there's maybe going to be quite a lot of dead space in front of you. Or if you have a crew that you think you might catch up, what does your race plan look like if you think you're going to be hunting down a crew in front of you, or even multiple crews in front of you? And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we're talking about race plans. Again, just reiterating that warm up and race plan itself. This is especially for the people who are in a bow loader. Talk to your rear view mirror. What does that mean? Well, I think one of the hardest things as a coxswain of a bow loader is that relationship that you need to build and develop with your stroke person. Your stroke person has the eyes and is going to be able to kind of help you navigate both warm up but also the race itself. If you have a crew that's coming up on you, for example, during racing, how are you going to know that? Well, how are you going to communicate? Start to talk about what you might sort of want from a steering and safety and race plan perspective, but also having a conversation if you're less used to a bow loader about what the racing might look like, because you're not fortunate enough to have that face-to-face interaction with a stroke person. Again, coming back to the logistics and the rules of the race, but also we're going to talk about weather shortly, but making sure you've got an idea of what the flag status is, aka how fast that river is going to be running because of how much water we've had, and checking the weather as well. Coming to the weather. This is not accurate. This is actually just a screenshot of Windy, the app. Should be any rower slash coxswain's best friend. It's super, super easy to understand. It's really very accurate, and it gives us a really, really good impression of what the wind is actually doing. For those of you who have been on the tideway before, you will know it can host multiple conditions in a quite short space of time. So you can go off the start and it feels like a lovely cross tail, and then all of a sudden you're coming out of Hammersmith and it feels like it's wind against tide and you're going through the chop. Understanding what the wind is doing is going to be really, really important. That comes down to preparing your race plan, thinking about your warm up, because if it's a really chilly day, you don't want to get the athletes really, really hot and then they're going to cool down as they sit and marshal and they don't, for example, have enough kit. Thinking about the weather is a really great way that any coxswain should start any training session, and definitely what you should be thinking about in the tideway. Thinking about the impact it might have on your race as well, and understanding where the shelter is. If we were a little bit closer to the race, I'd love to be able to talk you through some of those things. But as we go through the race, as Tilda is going to talk about kind of the way that the tideway kind of unfolds and it kind of looks, she'll be able to kind of suggest some things. Okay, if it's a headwind, this is what it'll look like if it's a tailwind. But ultimately, one of the best things you can have a look at is if you look on the Windy app down here, you've got the base wind and then you've got it says wind gusts, and it really helpfully just has an arrow. All you need to do is open the Windy app, have that tideway map alongside it, and you can literally map exactly what the wind is going to be doing, because you're going to be facing multiple wind conditions, and that means then you may well be wanting to monopolize on a certain part of the race, knowing that it's going to get a little bit rough a little bit later on. Here,
And
yeah. Oh
just
yeah,
sorry, Erin, just jumping in with that, I think on the morning of your event, remembering what Erin mentioned before, that the tide probably won't have turned yet. So when you go out and you take a look at the course, it's one of the best things you can do is go and look at the course that you go out to go on. But if you have the time to go and do that, it's great. But do remember the conditions in that point at that point in time. Even if the wind direction is the same as it suggests it's going to be later in the day, the tide direction is different. So just bear that in mind when you do go in the morning.
yeah. Definitely. I'm normally, if I'm kind of racing, I in recent years have kind of boated from around Hammersmith, and obviously where you boat from, you might be, boating from near the finish if you're in Putney, and you might be saying, "Oh, it's quite rough here," and then, message a friend who's down at, I don't know, up like UL, and being like, "What's it like down there?" We're normally on the WOX chat. We're normally all chatting about what the weather's doing in all the different sections because it does really vary across the whole course. So you can see here, this is a great example of we put some lovely red arrows. Tilda's going to talk you through in a lot more detail what this race actually looks like. But if you have a look here on the bottom left of your screen, that is where the start line is. And it takes you all the way through this bell curve, essentially, to the finish at the bottom right. You can see that it is, if this, we're talking a kind of southwesterly breeze, you would be starting off into a headwind. And as you come out of Barnes Bridge around kind of 3.5, 3 3/4 minutes into the race, all of a sudden you're starting to hit a crosswind here. And this can be quite wide, it can be quite exposed, and it can get a little bit choppy. So expecting that. Then as you come up to that point at the 4.4 where it says the Chiswick Steps, you can see you're basically starting that turn. You can be then a little bit more sheltered as you come around that bend. But if I was looking at this, I'd be expecting to almost go through that halfway mark. And as I come around to St. Paul's, it to be really quite choppy. All the way choppy through that kind of Hammersmith because it's got that side press. I'm going to be more onto that Surrey bank as well. So I'm going to be closer to basically the turn as I come through the bridge. And then it's pretty much a straight crosswind all the way down. Once again, it gets quite wide, can get a little bit exposed. And then I'd expect as I start to come around Barn Elms, where you can see that 1K marker is in Craven Cottage, you're going to be maybe a little bit more protected because there's quite a lot of infrastructure on that part of the river. I'll be a little bit more protected into the finish. I'm not going to lie, if I was a rower and I was having a look at this, I'd think, well, that's going to be a long race. But you can imagine, obviously, if that's the other way around, yes, at some point you'd have a lovely tailwind, but you will also face a crosswind as well. That is the beauty of the tideway. It is not the same in every section. So if you're thinking about how to prepare, the other thing is, and we're not going to run through everything like this, but what to pack, and this will be a great reference point. Feel free to take a picture. I make a kit list like this for every single race, and I have been coxing, 15 years, but it's nothing more annoying than if you've forgotten your sunnies, you don't have that tool you really wanted. So making sure that you've got, the stuff you need. You need your Cox box, you need a speed coach. It'll be very difficult to borrow a Cox box if you have forgotten one. Life jacket is really important. You've got enough kit that you are warm. And I want to really, really reiterate this. A warm body means that you will be able to think clearly and operate effectively. I promise you that just racing in a thin splash jacket and a lycra, maybe one pair of leggings, that is not going to be the difference between, a couple of places or not. And if any rowers try and say that, then just send them to us. You definitely need to be warm. We did have a question from someone who's in a bow loader talking about getting wet. Unfortunately, that is a challenge, especially when you're marshalling. If you get splashed and you get damp, and then you're going to be, essentially waiting to marshal. Obviously, also, if it's raining, there's not a lot we can do about that. But making sure you've got really good waterproofs. I'd really recommend waterproof socks. Keeping your feet warm and keeping your head and hands warm are really, really important. If what I would be doing is thinking about when I went back to this, how to prepare pre-paddle, things like that, I wouldn't be doing any square blades work. Even if your coach wants you to, I would be thinking, bit of backsplash. Let's try and avoid that as much as possible. Thinking about when we're kind of doing bursts and pieces and stuff like that, the reality is you are probably going to get a little bit splashed. What I would make sure is you've got enough layers on. And what I have actually done in the past is you've got a really, really thin waterproof, for example. There's nothing stopping you grabbing another waterproof that's really thin. I once boated about I was crew 400 or something. I knew I was going to be there for forever. And I basically got, one of those Pacamax, and I shoved it just right down to the bottom of the boat by my feet. I actually didn't end up needing it, but I was like, if I get absolutely drenched, I can actually take that really wet waterproof off, which sometimes then starts to seep into your fleece or whatever you're wearing underneath, and just put a fresh waterproof on. Um,
And the other thing to stay warm, those foil blankets are super helpful. Foil blankets or bin liners, all really, really cheap and effective.
yeah, absolutely. Um, the last thing that I will highlight here is hand gel. We have all read over the last year or two about the cleanliness of some of the water, but I'd say the tideway is its own special breed of disease that you may well pick up. So make sure that you've got some hand gel for after your pre-paddle. For after you get out the boat, make sure you're squeezing it on everyone's hands that you see, possibly. You don't want to end up getting ill, but just make sure that's really important. And then what I would also encourage your rowers as well, if you're taking a drink in the boat, but for the rowers or the steers people here, is what you want is, those bottle caps, which you can basically have a cover on the top. So think about, those Lucasade Sport bottles. You've got the little cap on top, so that you're not sort of got a bottle rattling around in the bottom of the boat. You're getting splashed, and then you're going and putting that nozzle in your mouth. Just trying to keep everyone super healthy as we go through the season.
I saw that Fours had, as in the Saturday race, shared something on their, like a packing list on their Instagram today, which made me so happy.
Love that. Yeah, that's
I
perfect.
loved that that tied into this.
Yeah. A couple of big logistics. We've chatted to the people who are running all the different races and a couple of the really big key take homes that they've kind of pushed to us, but also that we completely agree with. Number one, listen to the marshals. The marshals are there and they are volunteering their time for your safety, to ensure that the race runs. And we genuinely, as a sport, must be so grateful for our volunteers because without them, we would just not have any racing all year round. It just wouldn't work. They are trying to get you to the right position and make sure that basically the race can run to time. And I know that if you are bow number 300, you'll be very grateful that the marshals are really hot on it in those first few divisions. So make sure you listen to the marshals. If they are asking you to tap up or move up, please do so. We're going to be talking about marshalling in a minute, but I will reiterate it there. But we've spoken to some of the marshals and they've said if they are asking you to move, but a couple of crewmates are doing something in the boat, whether they're de-kitting or they want to, I don't know, faff with their foot plate. If you're being asked to move, then please use at least, two of you to keep tapping it on. If you're in a quad, get three of them to keep moving, because they'll be asking you for a reason. Particularly if it's windy, their job is going to be really challenging trying to keep everybody in the same place. So please do listen to them. If they are a little bit stressed and a little bit short, remember you are not the first crew they've interacted with today, and all they're trying to do is basically get everything moving. So be really kind and polite to the marshals because they make the racing happen, but please do listen. The other big thing they've asked us to kind of really reiterate is make yourselves visible and known. What we mean specifically here is firstly, numbers. Everyone will be given numbers. So making sure your number can be seen. Obviously, you will have most likely in the empacker slots, you kind of have a bow number that will stick up. But bear in mind, you can only really see them if you're side on. So actually, if you are the bow person or you are kind of sat up or whoever has basically been given the numbers, with the bow person, the stroke person, whoever it is, make sure they can see your numbers. Really, really important one to think about. I never even thought about this, but they were saying that it can happen, if you've got long hair, for example, you've got a perfectly seen number, but then if your hair's just flowing out the back, out of your ponytail, they're not going to be able to see it. So making sure your bow numbers are able to see, and also please make sure people are wearing the club or school kit that is the same as the club you're representing. Obviously, we know that's not always easy. So if you don't have that, but you have some people in your crew who are wearing that kit, that's great. Try not to wear something that's conflicting. So, for example, we don't have, I don't know, an Imperial crew and then someone's wearing a UL splash jacket. Because then it starts to get really confusing for the marshals. They're not going to be able to communicate with you effectively, and you probably won't realize they're talking to you. So if you don't have club kit or school kit, maybe just something that's really neutral, so it's not distracting from the people who are wearing the right kit. So just thinking about a couple of the logistics before the race. Really, really important about this kind of boating. it's important to remember there are lots of crews of a real mixed ability, and especially in the kind of the junior events you've got, and also the fourth. To be honest, ignore that. In every single race, you've got crews of mixed ability, and you've got mixed boats. So if you've only ever done an eights head before, you've just got a load of eights. But now you've got quads, you've got cox quads, you've got coxless fours, you've got fours. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a particular challenge to get down to the start. So we recommend you give it at least an hour if you are boating from Putney. That might seem excessive, but if you are not in position at the time on the rules, it says you are in position, then you will not be able to race. And especially if you are in an early division, we're going to probably have a look at kind of some of how the divisions made up may well look. You're going to need to get past quite a lot of other crews in order to get to where you need to be to stop to marshal. We recommend around 40 minutes from Hammersmith to get in position, because bear in mind, the further you get down the course, the more crews you'll meet, and also the more crews you've got to basically work around. What is important to remember is you stick to normal navigation for the tide that you're rowing on until you reach the marshalling area. So essentially, you're basically rowing knowing that anyone going down that main so the inshore zone, essentially within the buoys, then you're basically going towards the start. And then once you can kind of do loops. There's no kind of rules about where you can and can't spin, other than you should definitely not be spinning around the crossing point, because that's very dangerous if you're just kind of spinning around and trying to do loops there. But make sure that there's kind of real clarity when you are turning. But you can basically do loops if you have enough time to come back, towards the finish, and then turn around and jump back into that marshalling area. It's very, very important to know there is nothing allowed other than paddling in the marshalling area. You cannot be doing bursts. You can't be doing half slide rate builds. Make sure that once you are in that marshalling area, all you are doing is paddling. And the very last, very important thing is make sure you fill the gaps. It is the marshals' favorite call. They will be asking you to fill the gaps, fill the gaps. And what they basically mean is, if your crew 200 and crew 199 is 5 lengths in front of you, you need to be kind of getting really nice and tight and close to them. Here at WOX, we are trying to build a coxing community, and we'd love that to bleed into all of you steers people who are here as well. Essentially, get friendly with those people around you. Even if you plan on starting really close behind the crew in front and you're going to go really hard and try and overtake them, let the racing do the talking, but chat to the crews around you. If you need more space, ask for more space. If someone asks you to move up, do what you can to accommodate it. Rowing is a really friendly, lovely sport, and we want to keep it that way. And a great way to build those relationships is when we're marshalling as well. This is an example. I don't want any of you to take this as gospel, because, for example, at Junior and Vets Head, it's very unlikely that marshalling will go beyond Barnes Bridge. You can see where Barnes Bridge is here on the bottom right, but that's just basically based on numbers. But essentially, you need to get into that marshalling position. You need to know where you're going. At the Saturday Force Head, there are different colours. So you either got numbers in yellow or numbers in white, which will help you to navigate. Also, if you can't remember, obviously, anyone else's divisions. But knowing which side of the river, once you get below Chiswick Pier, which side you need to be on. If you're unsure and you can't remember, you get there, the marshal will be able to help you. But ideally, you know exactly where you need to go. Something that's really important, as well as filling those gaps, but once you're marshalling, is how do you keep your boat in the same place, especially if it's windy? And to be honest, the big thing is essentially not switching off when you get into marshal area. So making sure you're really engaged, and your athletes, whether they are the people in front of you as a steers person, or whether they are your athletes and you're the cox, they're listening to you and they're taking taps when you need them, and you're kind of being really aware of where you are. Normally, when I get to that point on the marshalling area, obviously I make sure that all the crews around me are who they need to be, or if I look and I'm like, wow, we're missing 4 people in front, then you know that you can't go too far up to those next people because you've got to slot 4 crews in between. But have a look on the bank and pick a point. And basically your aim is to try and stay on that point as much as you can, because bear in mind, it's moving water and you're going to get pushed away from it. And that is if it's a flat day, because you'll probably have some wind as well. So pick a point on the bank and make sure that you stay with it. Small taps, mix up who's tapping so people don't get cold, and then settle in for just kind of waiting. And then once the crew start, It's quite quick. You will all of a sudden start kind of moving up as that division starts to go. And give the crews a cheer as they're going past. It's really nice when if you're starting a little bit early in the division to have everyone cheering as you go past.
Just on that, Erin, as well, just remembering that the tide is pulling you, so it's faster. Depending on which side you are on of the river, it is faster on the side closest to the fairway. So you might get your bow swung out by the stream. So really making sure you are thinking about that. And on top of that, making sure you are thinking about the fact that the tide is going out, it's ebbing, so that the side of the river is getting lower. So being mindful of your fins, making sure you don't want to get swept around. So the fins aren't in any shallow water. I mean, also maybe the rest of your boat, but particularly your fin and your rudder is quite important to keep safe. And then really thinking about making sure you're not getting drifted out by the strength of the stream. It can catch you off guard if you aren't used to it. So please think about that. Alongside any like stationary objects, so buoys, buoys, however you want to pronounce it, or the bridges. So really making sure you're keeping a good open mind and making sure you're staying switched on, just like Erin said.
Yeah, 100%. So, um, thinking about the start time, and if we think about, move our heads towards the race itself. So getting to know your start time is really, really important. It will obviously there is the start time of the race itself. And there will be obviously making sure you're in the marshalling zone at a certain time. That will be relative, sorry, to the start time. But making sure you know what your start time is, and then thinking about, okay, I'm in the fourth division, so it's going to take about X amount of time to get these boats through. And so you're essentially kind of, if people are wanting to take gels, wanting to have some food or anything like that, is kind of making sure people know when their start time is likely to be. This picture here is the university stone, and you can see they draw a line across to there's a stick on the other side, which is obviously this is also where the finish of the boat race is. So it's painted in the colours of Oxford and Cambridge. And that is where the start is, and it is after Chiswick Bridge. When you come through Chiswick Bridge, there will be some sort of launch. You may hear them, you may not, who will most likely say your number and your club, and they might say an attention go. But essentially, once you're coming out of the bridge, Tilda's going to talk a little bit more about the race itself. But you want to be getting up to pace because not long after the bridge is this stone, and that is the start time. The other thing to say, just with the logistics, is obviously you are going to be going, having your bows obviously pointing away from the start line. You would have gone well beyond the start line, and they will essentially start turning crews. Now, the big thing about turning crews is that what you obviously can't do once you get down there, if you've never been down there before, that's absolutely fine. It is a wide, wide piece of river. You cannot just turn in and around on yourself and expect to be in the right place. What you will basically need to do is almost create a rectangle. So you'll need to have your bow side kind of moving on. You'll need to row into the center of the river, into that fairway, and then you're going to be turning again. Obviously, you can expect to be sort of tangled potentially around lots of other boats. You may well need actually the boat behind you, but if they're overlapped, you actually might need them to start turning, even though you actually need to get going before them, for example. And this is again, talk to the crews around you, make sure you've got the space, you know what you're doing, and you're managing your athletes. This is the time you read them really, really switched on. Those 2 minutes before racing is really, really important just to turn and get going. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind, create big gaps, and you could have quite a lonely race. During the race itself, once you get going, you must pass through the center arch of all the bridges, and you must stay on the fairway. The fairway is essentially the middle section of the river that is not demarked by buoys on either side. You must stick on the fairway and stay in the middle arch of all the bridges. Now, I want you to check the rules, as I'm sure you all will, on all of your various races, but we believe that you must safely give way to overtaking crews, and you must make sure that you both move out the way and make it very clear where you are going. You give them safe passage through, and only when they have completed that overtake and they are a safe distance away may you return to your ideal racing line. What I would say is the tideway is not a sort of beast where there is a magic escalator that is one boat wide. If you are in the right area and you are in the right section of the stream, and Tilda's going to talk a little bit more about where that is, you can move safely and still be very much in a good position on the river to let someone come through, whether that is your outside or your inside, however it might be as you're going through the different sections of the race without massively impacting your race at all. But the way that you manage your crew as you're going through either an overtake or being overtaken is actually really, really down to you and how you kind of manage and make sure that disrupts your crew as in the best way possible. Um, and one thing to think about as well is looking ahead and looking in advance about where you might want to be. Something that I did wrong this was actually admittedly in an eight's head a number of years ago, is I anticipated we would be overtaking a crew maybe sooner than we were, and I positioned myself in a place that had we done that overtake, that would have been the best piece of water. But what I should have done as it became clearer that we weren't overtaking this crew as quickly as I thought, is essentially almost swap sides. So as we were coming around that Hammersmith bend, I would be in the position that I wanted to be as we came out of the bend. I did not do that. I did not make that clear. And the other crew were well within their right to essentially give way, but they essentially gave way to the way that I was indicating that they should and went to the inside. And I ended up actually having to go around the outside. That was an error from me and definitely slowed down the racing. So it's both giving way safely and overtaking safely, but also making it really clear to the crew where you would like to overtake as well. So having a bit of a think about that, and that's part of that preparation. Fundamentally, all crews have a responsibility to avoid clashing, and there will be penalties if crews are not giving way, if crews are unsafely overtaking, because ultimately we just want everyone to have a really good and safe race.
Um,
This, oh, go,
Sorry, Erin.
no,
We
go.
believe that's the start line for all races. We believe that that is the start line for all races. That
Yeah.
does not mean we are 100% Bible, so please go and read the rules. I know I've said that we've both said this about 10 times now, but we're going to keep saying it. You must know where the start line is. You must know the rules of the racing. That is not our job. We are just sharing as much knowledge as we can.
Thank you. Yeah, you cannot come at us if we've got it wrong. And then this is the very unglamorous bit about the logistics after the race. So the circulation pattern after the race, your athletes are really tired. You are, trying to kind of keep their attention to make sure you can safely get round. If you are a steers person, you're also really tired as well, but you need to be thinking about this as the legal master of the vessel. So once you finish the cross finish line, we have been told by all of the racing that the finish line is on Putney Pier. If you are not 1,000% sure, where exactly that finish line is, just take those few more strokes. Make sure you're fully through at pace before you essentially take that rate down. But you do not stop rowing. Nobody stops rowing when they finish. They must keep rowing. Think really light, full length. Most likely is probably the safest thing to do, but really, really light pressure. You will be instructed to go through both bridges. There will be lots of umpires making sure you go all the way through both bridges, which is the Putney Bridge and then the Putney Rail Bridge, which is a much skinnier bridge. They're not that far away, but you need to go through both. And then most likely there'll be a marshal there saying your crew name, and they'll be able to know because you'll have it very clearly marked by the kit you're wearing and the number, that it is time to turn. So they will turn you and they will stagger to make sure as many crews can be turning as safely as possible. And then you're basically going to return and go through, we've called it Arch 4, but essentially it's not the closest arch to the bank. It's the next one along, not the one that you've just gone through, which is the centre arch. And then you will pass in front of Putney Pier and cut into that inshore zone. So you will essentially be out of the way, well out of the way of those racing crews, and you'll tuck in safely. Only once you get into that inshore zone, you will either be landing because you boated from Putney, lucky you, or if you are paddling beyond Putney to go back to your club that you boated from, then essentially what I would say is get through that inshore zone, get away from Putney because it will be busy. There'll be lots of crews trying to land. Get through and away. Then if you want to stop, let the athletes have a drink, have a snack, put some kit on, absolutely fine. Row in pairs for a bit. You can break it up as much as you like. But really important is clear that inshore zone, get away from it, because then you're just not going to be in the way of anybody else. When you're getting home, It's so important. Let's make sure we don't impede any racing crews. The only reason you would need to get into the fairway is if you are crossing in order to get back to your boat club. So if you're boating from Fulham Reach, for example, you would need to be crossing. But there will always be a marshal at any of those crossing points where you need to go back to your boathouse. So essentially, it comes all the way back to that listening to a marshal. When instructed, cross quickly, go all four. Make sure you just get out of the way of any racing crews. Over to Tilda.
And do not cross unless a marshal has said you can cross. That
Exactly
is
that.
a good lesson. Perfect. Thanks so much, Erin. So when we come on to the race track, there's sort of two parts to this. So I'm going to do a brief overview, and the race plan kind of comes into this. So there are many ways to break up this course. You can break it into as many sections as you'd like. Beautiful, thank you. So here's the breakdown of the distance markers. Now, typically, I would break this course into 5 sections. So you will have the start to Barnes Bridge, that would be one section. You will have Barnes Bridge through to Chiswick Pier, which would be second section. You had Chiswick Pier through to Hammersmith Bridge, which is a longer section. Then you will have Hammersmith Bridge through to Barn Elms Boat Club, and then Barn Elms through to the finish. So there would be my 5 sections if I was going to create a race plan. That is not absolutely paramount. That would just be my way of doing it. You could break it into 3 sections and go start to Barnes, Barnes to Hammersmith, Hammersmith to the finish. So it's kind of what suits your crew. But what you want to make sure is that within those sections, you've got really clear, very simple focuses. And using the way the course is broken down can really help with that. So, firstly, knowing your distances, knowing A, the distances, and B, roughly a bit of an idea of how long it's going to take your crew to cover that distance. That will really help you start to build the calls that you want to make, start to build the technical focus that you want to make, and it becomes very, very clear to your crew what they are doing, what the aim is of that section of the race. And you're racing over 6.8 kilometers, you're racing over 20 to 25 minutes, you are really making sure that there is clear, concrete focus in that athlete's head. And as you go from the start, where you're feeling nice and fresh, and you start to transition into using your aerobic zone, and then you get 15 minutes into the race and your brain starts to go, oh, I can't listen anymore. I don't know what's happening. And it becomes all mushy because it's exhausting rowing that far. Then you want to know that the athletes are still hearing you. And so you want to make sure that that's in your head, that's really thought through, well processed, so that then the calls that are being made are very direct, very clear, very simple. Perfect. So as I mentioned, the brief overview. So I'm going to go very, very, very basic to begin with. There are sort of 3 sections of the race when it comes to steering. The first part is from Chiswick Bridge through to the White Hart, so it's a short section. There you want to be central, very slightly right of centre. Then the second section, we'll come to bridges in a second. Second section, once you've come through Barnes Bridge, is from Barnes Bridge all the way round until there's a green buoy just before Hammersmith Bridge. So for that long, long stretch, you want to be central slash very slightly left of centre. Then final bit, again, I'll come to bridges in a minute. Final section, all the way down that last straight, not straight, last bend. You want to be right of centre. Centre, right of centre. Okay, so that's the very, very basic overview of how you're going to carve out this course. Now, we'll get into a little bit more detail. The main thing I want you to take away from the image here is the way the course flows and the way the bridges sit across. So you can see Barnes Bridge, Hammersmith Bridge. They're the two ones that I really want you to focus on here. They are sitting at a different angle across the river. They are not straight across the river. They are at an angle. So you've got to think about your entry and exit angle on the bridge based on the fact that the bridge is not straight across. So you are trying to make sure you're keeping yourself in the fastest part of the water whilst also setting yourself up to enter and exit the bridge in an effective way. So in both of these, it's the opposite. So Barnes Bridge, you want to come in and you want to line yourself up to cut through with your bows pointing over towards the left-hand side of the river. This is as a cox. I'm speaking from a cox's perspective, just to clarify. So you want to set that up. And then for Hammersmith Bridge, you'll come in and you'll set yourself up so that you are pointing to the right-hand side. Okay. So there are two things to bear in mind. Aside from that, basic overview of the steering. I will get into a little bit more detail now as we go through. So start, Chiswick Bridge. So you want to set yourself up. Here's a really nice image. This is the bridge. You've got the two lights. So you can see the two lights on the digitalized image as opposed to on the bridge. You will be able to see them. They are quite obvious. So as Erin mentioned before, you really want to think about how you are turning onto your starting line. So if you are turning in from the Surrey station, so as we look at the screen on the right-hand side, so if you are turning in from there, you want to make sure that you are turning a little bit tighter than if you were turning in from the Middlesex station, which is, as we look at the screen on the left-hand side. So if you're turning in from the Middlesex station, you will want to make a little bit of a bigger U, rectangle. So that's because the way you want to set yourself up for this is you want your stroke side riggers, not the spoons of your blades, but the riggers going under the orange lights. That sets you up to be able to take, and it feels a little bit counterintuitive, but the whole of the tideway feels counterintuitive, is you want to take the outside of the bend. So you want to be ever so slightly right of center. Now, we had a really great question asked in the form. What happens and how do you tell as the tide height changes where the racing line is? Awesome question. So there's two tips here. Number one, go onto Google Earth and look at the tideway when the tide is all the way out, and you'll see where the deepest water is left. So that's just a good tip. Two, if you try and break the river up from bank to bank into thirds, then you can really think about that central third, lock into that central third, and you can position yourself, and it will change as the tide changes. So you're thinking more bank to bank as opposed to where the river is on the sides of the bank. So if you're really thinking about that, you want to be ever so slightly right of center through here. And you want to hold that all the way through to the White Hart pub. Now, the White Hart pub, if you do not know it, it can be a little tricky to spot. The other thing you're looking out for is there is a green buoy on the left-hand side. So the Middlesex station, which is the left-hand side from a cox's point of view as you're going into Barnes Bridge. So you'll have run all the way down that track, just ever so slightly on the right-hand side of the centre, and you're coming into Barnes Bridge. Now, if you've got the White Hart in mind, great. If you don't know where the White Hart is and you've lined yourself up knowing where that green buoy is, that's what you're thinking of as your turning point. So you're thinking, okay, I want to exit here in a straight line, and think about what the course looked like as an overview. You want to come at a straight line from the outside of the bend to the inside of the next corner. So you're thinking about lining yourself up from the White Hart pub, and you can't quite see all the way through Barnes Bridge, you just can't. So you're thinking about starting to point your bows over to stroke side, over to Middlesex. And as you start thinking about that, you want to do gentle steering in, and then you want to steer fairly hard to make sure you set your entry angle to allow for your exit angle as you exit Barnes Bridge. So you want to steer gently to begin with, and then you want to steer quite hard into Barnes Bridge as you actually go under the bridge, and then you want to set yourself up almost hands-off rudder to let the tide and let the stream carry you out the bridge and along. You've got a green buoy just up ahead of you, and you're thinking about being 1 to 2 boat widths off the green buoy. Now, I say 1 to 2 boat widths because that will change depending on the tide height. So you will be a little bit closer to it if the tide height is lower. So this is a really nice image of what that will look like. You can't quite see the buoy, but you will have lined yourself up to exit. This is now your next section. So this section you want to be left-hand side of the center. Now, the center being the fairway, thinking again, bank to bank. So we're going all the way from the bank over on the Surrey station, all the way to the top of the bank on the Middlesex station. So we're really thinking about what that looks like. The other thing to bear in mind here, and you can really see from this image, you can see where the stream is, you can see how much it's pulling, but you can also see how the wind will affect the surface of the water. So you can really see how the eddies are working under the water, the different little bit of random pools of water because of the shallows over on this middle. Oh my goodness, come on, Matilda. Over on this Surrey station. So you can see on the Surrey station, you can see all of that bank that you can see visible. That's shallow. We don't want to be anywhere near that. If we're over there, we're right in shallow water. And I mention that because if the tide is high, you won't be able to see that. There will be none of that showing. You'll have crews lined up there ready to race potentially. So you've really got to think about keeping in mind bank to bank, no matter where the tide height is. So this section, you're sweeping along the Middlesex side of the centre all the way through this next section. So you're coming through, and now just before you get to Chiswick Steps, which you'll see highlighted here, there's a crossing point. And now this crossing point is really useful as a navigation marker. I can think of things that you would look up ahead to, but depending on the tide height, depends on how relevant they are. There are two really tall silver chimneys. They're narrow and tall, and they sit like this. Now, they are a really handy sort of thing to have in mind. You aren't definitely aiming for them, but you're definitely looking to spot them. What we don't want is those to be miles out of range and your bows to be pointed off over towards Surrey. And actually you're looking up and those chimneys are there and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm nowhere near them. So you kind of want those as a rough viewpoint. And it's at this point that you come to the center of the crossover, right in the middle. And you want to be bang in the middle of that crossover, and then you're going to be right in the middle. You're not going to be super, super, super close to the pier where you're sat on top of it as you come through Chiswick Pier. You're going to be bank to bank. You're going to be center, center, center. You want to be center all the way around here. Now, as a cox, your intuition is telling you to cut the bend. It's willing you to cut the bend, and it sits there and it says, cut the bend, please take me, because that's what you're used to doing. What you've got to bear in mind is where the deepest water is. You've got to trust what you can actually feel underneath you. And you've got to trust that the stream will do its job here. And we talk a lot, especially when I'm coaching the coxes for the boat race, we talk a lot about that there's a lot of you're guiding your boat. You're not steering your boat. The only time you really need to steer your hull is under the bridges. And no other point do you feel like, yeah, I'm going around a bend, off I go and steer. You just nudge and guide and try to hold yourself on. You've got to imagine, a cox once described this to me as the vision, and this is a little bit rogue, but it's really helped me see this. You've got to think about the vision of in Tron, if anybody's watched Tron, that bright blue line, that's how he visioned it. So it's having that idea that like there's this sort of magical pathway. It's quite broad. It's not like Erin said previously, it's not one boat width. So you've got to think about being on that sort of roller coaster and your boat being on that knife edge, being carried along, and you're just guiding and nudging to make sure you don't fall off the edge. So you've got to be in the center there, coming through there, and then this next bit all the way along through Chiswick Ayot. This is a long section of the race. So we talked a bit earlier about conditions. It's very likely that at this point of the race, we're approaching halfway, we will have experienced minimum one set of conditions, but very, very likely by this point, two sets of conditions, potentially three. So at this point, we've had whatever the conditions are. So if we're going by our arrows, we've had a bit of a headwind in that first section, head crosswind. We've had a crosswind hard at us in this section we've just been talking about up to here. Now, at this point, as we come through the AIT and out the other side of the AIT, the conditions start to change. So you've got to be reading up ahead of you, thinking about what's happening, where there are crews around you. Are you going to have to do some overtaking? You've got to really be thinking, are you going to be wanting to make sure that your crew are like well invested in this long section of the race as you head into Hammersmith Bridge? You still have half of the course to go by this point. So you've got to make sure that they are motivated in a way that allows you to take the best line, but it also allows you to feel that you are in command of this section of the race, not being willed by that bend, that inner corner, but actually thinking about the fastest water and how to hold your line and resist the will to take you over there, whilst also thinking up ahead about, do I want to be on the inside or outside of this crew that I might potentially be overtaking up ahead of me? So you're really reading the race. You've got the conditions coming in, you've made an assessment, you're going to make calls based on the decision, on the conditions that you can see. This is a really, really useful image. And I keep talking about bank to bank. At this point, we are right hand side, sorry, we are middle. We are middle of the central third. Now, the fairway, with being middle, you've got to think bank to bank, excluding the island. So it's quite hard to get your head around that. So what we're going to think about really is you see the shallows here. You don't want to be up on top of the AIT. If you're up on top of the AIT and right next to it, really, really close to it, we're in some shallow water. But we also don't want to be all the way over towards the other side because if we are, we're then in a situation where we're cutting the bend and we're not really utilizing the deep water to our best effect. So this is a hard part of the race, and I'd say that this is the bit for me. I don't know about you, Erin, but this is the bit for me that took the longest really to learn.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
I think as well, like you can I actually like this image because you can kind of see where the shallows are. And if you kind of look at that, you can see it's like slightly darker. It's not like an illusion of the image. It is slightly darker and you can almost see how it like semi sort of scoops around the island. You don't want to be steering loads in and around the island, but I think it's being confident of where you are. Especially, if you're earlier in that division, then obviously you won't have as much of the A showing, but it's remembering that this is actually 300 meters of your race. It's not super long. And actually, probably what the biggest advantage is if it's probably better to be, if you have to, pick being that slight bit closer, that really means you don't cut the bend off the back of it. And then you have a deep water kind of approach to that Hammersmith bend because it is just that slightly kind of odd part of the race. And also just I found especially if you're using a speed coach, you can sometimes expect it goes a little bit deader here, but almost trusting that it'll pick that bit back up again because it does sort of change where that depth is a little bit.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think what you're really thinking about here is how to set yourself up for the best line that you want to take through Hammersmith. So you're always thinking a step ahead, a section ahead. So you're making sure that your boat is going to be in the best possible place. So you aren't wanting to be on the so close on that Surrey station that you end up being pulled so tight that you have to steer out to then steer back in through Hammersmith. You want to have a smooth journey through Hammersmith Bridge. And so you'll see, oh, yeah, halfway. This is probably the hardest thing to see in the entire race, the halfway point. The blue doors are not as obvious as you may seem, so this is a really useful image to see them highlighted here. If you do not see them, it is not the end of the world. What you're looking for is just off the end of the AIT. That's where halfway is.
If in doubt, I've missed them more than once. Is once you get to that big line of like terraced, I say terraced, I'm sure they're worth many millions, terraced houses. um, once you hit them and if you haven't seen the doors, you're through halfway.
Exactly that. And you sweep yourself around again the outside of this bend so it feels counterintuitive. It's just slightly, to the left of the bend, but it is definitely to the left of the center. So then you're setting yourself up for Hammersmith Bridge. So I've mentioned this again. You're thinking about the fact that the bridge is not directly across. Now, everybody who talks about the second lamppost, wise, very wise. We've highlighted it here. What we really want to make sure is if you cannot see the second lamppost, it is not the end of the world. What you want to make sure is that you are setting yourself up in the deepest channel of water, which, as you sweep round, is probably the best way to describe this. You sweep round, there is a big green navigation buoy on the Middlesex station here on your left-hand side as a Cox. You want at that point to be making sure you're really starting to set yourself up through Hammersmith Bridge. You are then thinking about if you can see the lamppost. You're thinking about making sure that your stroke side riggers are going under the lamppost. So it's quite tight. It feels quite tight. If you are not able to see the lamppost, you want to be a few blade widths, probably two blade lengths off the buttress. What you really are thinking about is what's on the other side of the bridge, same as you were through Barnes. So what's on the other side of the bridge is this red navigation buoy. You can see it there just up ahead. So it's the one opposite the, you can see the pier on the left. It's one opposite. So that pontoon, we'll call it a pontoon. That's what it really is. So that pontoon is Fulham Reach Boat Club. So opposite that, you've got your navigation buoy that's just outside Harrods. You want to be pretty close to that navigation buoy. And it's at this section of the race where there could be many, many things going on. Now, we've used an eights picture here. The reason we've used an eights image is actually just because it's a really good display of how many crews could be overlapping and crossing over all together at the same point. So
Also,
there are
potentially, sorry to interrupt, Taylor, of
no,
how many lines one could take to come through the bridge.
absolutely.
And I'm looking at all of them, and I'd say none of them are really where they should be. There's obviously different things going on with undertaking, overtaking, and all those sorts of things. But putting yourself in the best piece of water is the best place to start in order to then manage those overtakes.
Absolutely. So, can you see my mouse?
I
No.
can't.
Okay. I
I
thought I'd
can,
ask.
I could, if in case they can see mine, I can move mine.
So, no, okay, fine. It was just a useful idea. So I was just thinking that you can see here you've got three boats on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got three boats on the right-hand side of the screen, and then you've got the crew up in red that's a little bit ahead. So I'd say the crew up in red that's ahead, they're too far away from the red buoy. They are at quite a good angle. I'd say positionally, the angle that they are at is really quite good. And then you've got the three crews over to the left-hand side of the screen. All of them are too wide. If you want the fastest racing line. Now, the the crews on the right-hand side of the screen have got the right idea. My concern about this is that I believe that they've probably taken, and you can kind of guess this. You can, if we just cast our minds back to that long section through the Ayot, I would imagine all three of these crews took that line too tightly. So they cut the bend. They were too tight on that bend. Now, with that in mind, the reason I've said that is because their positions aren't terrible, but their angles are pointing with their bows over towards where the shallows will be. So we've got to think about the direction of that we want the boat in. So the crew that's sort of in second position on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a Cox. Oh yes, perfect. So that crew there, I'd say they're in a good position in terms of where we want them coming up on the river, but we would like their bows pointed so that their stern is over towards Surrey and they're over towards I'm going to one more time. Bows over towards Surrey, stern over towards Middlesex. So this is what we would like to see. So their position is good. We would just like to have seen them enter the bridge at a position where they could exit like this. So we're then holding that line. It's hard to pick a point in the distance, but we are then holding that line right hand side, right up close to those buoys, and there's three navigation buoys that you want to hold that line all the way up till. So you feel again like you are on the outside of the bend. That is the deepest water through this section. It is quite likely, not definite, but it is quite likely at this point that it could be quite choppy. If it is quite choppy, you want to be really making sure that you are talking to your crew about the shape they're creating, about the separation they're creating, and about how they hold their knees so that they can deliver that really good push and have the space to be able to then organize and get their bodies in a really good position to come out and place their blades over that choppy water. So if you can keep that in mind all the way through this section from so past Harrods, we've come all the way through the milepost. There's a buoy, a navigation buoy just past the milepost, and then you are aiming. And the Barn Elms buoy, which is one just over, well, it's 1 kilometer to go. It's just over. It's about 1,100 meters. You see, it's slightly skew. So at Barn Elms, there's a boat club there. You've got the bank. You've got a navigation buoy. You don't want to get sucked into that too much. We don't want to be as close to that navigation buoy as we are to the one by Harrods and the one by the milepost. But we do want to be still quite close to it, still on the outside of that bend. And it's at that point that you start thinking about the finish line. So this is a really beautiful image of where we want to be. Barn elms on the top of your screen and then the line of boats on the bottom of your screen. And it's at that point that you want to make sure that you are lining yourself up, thinking about the black buoy, thinking about that line of boats, the black buoy that's actually yellow, um, thinking about the line of boats, and you want to line yourself up so you've got a really clear, almost straight line all the way through to the finish from Barn Elms right the way through to the pier. So the pier is where the finish line of all the events is. So if those of you are juniors and you are used to racing the Schools Head of the River, the Schools Head finishes much earlier at Westminster Boathouse. This finishes at Putney Pier. So please remember that. When you're setting yourself up against the line of buoys and the line of boats, you've got the black buoy there. You're really thinking about making sure you are not too close, but probably within two blade lengths of that line of boats. So you can really set yourself up as straight a line as possible. And you start really thinking the black buoy, you've got 600 meters to go. So it's a really good way to break down your build into the finish line, your sprint, however you want to call it, your tiers, whatever they might be called. So you're really making sure at that point you're thinking about that part of your race plan. So 1 kilometer to go from Barn Elms, and then you've got 600 meters to go from the Black Buoy. You want to go right the way through the finish line. You don't want to be stopping at the finish line, so get through the pier. Usually the finish line is halfway through the pier, but you want to get through the pier, and then you'll be called down. And that is the course.
Amazing. We have just hit an hour, so if there are any burning questions, please do drop them in. But hopefully, we have answered pretty much all your questions that you asked in advance. Just while we have you here, you may well have seen on our socials, we are super excited that the conference WOXCon is back. It is the only. I wanted to say I was a bit disappointed because apparently they do a conference in America because I wanted to say it's the world's only coxing specific conference, but I'm going to say it's the only one outside of America that we've ever found that is
Yeah.
just for coxes. It's amazing. We're in our second year. We sold out last time. We had 100 coxers coming together to join in community, to share, hear from amazing speakers, and we are back. We have probably about 30 tickets left, which is really exciting. It is in a couple of weeks on Sunday, the 3rd of November at Leander Club, and it is
23rd of November.
did I say third? Third is today, 23rd of November. We're going to basically be hearing from a couple of different panels. We have Jonna, who coxed the Dutch men's eight to the top spot. She's the current world champion in the men's eight. And Will de Negri, who is a European champion and has been with the GB men's eight this year and had a silver medal. They're going to be on a panel together. We've got the WOX panelists coming together to do something. We've got some club coxers sharing their experiences, loads of breakouts. It's for everybody. Masters coxers, junior coxers, whether you've just learned or you've been coxing for years, there's something to learn. So take a scan. Please do save the date, and we'd love to see you there. And the other thing is, we do all of this is not for profit. We are trying to basically improve coxing access to learning and just keep sharing our amazing sport and making sure that everyone who sits in that brilliant seat feels like they have the opportunity to develop and perform at their best. So if you are able to support our work, it allows us to do all this for free, to pay for our Zoom account, please do scan that and you can buy us a coffee to say thank you. And yeah, we hopefully will see you guys down on the bank at Falls Head. There's going to be quite a lot of WOX mentors around. So if you see us, do say hello. We'll have some stickers we can hand out. And hopefully, as well, we'll see you at the conference as well.
Any questions, do pop them in. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming. And hopefully, we've given you some good tips for your racing.
Thanks all.